Good morning and welcome to Identity Leathercraft. This morning we're going to look at how to do backstitch. There are lots of great tutorials on saddle stitch online, so I'm not going to try and cover those. If you want to see some really good ones, if you follow our useful links page and go to Nigel Armitage or Ian Atkinson's channels, you'll see some really good tutorials there. Sometimes it's useful to be able to do backstitch. Backstitch is a bit messier on the back. You don't get that neat look top and bottom that you get with saddle stitch, but sometimes that doesn't matter. It's going to be on the inside of a bag, on the back of a pocket. I used it, for example, on this soft leather to make this apron. It's halfway through, not quite finished, but to sew this pocket area on, it wasn't anything I could put into a stitching pony. The back isn't going to matter, although I've managed to get it reasonably neat. Hopefully you can see that. This is brown on brown, so for the tutorial I'm going to use red on white leather to show up. But you can see there that because it's in the centre of a panel, it's quite tricky to do saddle stitch with, whereas backstitch you can literally just work with it and sit and do it in front of the television, and it's only using the one needle. So that's when you might want to use it. So I've got a piece of eco white leather here. This is our leather we sell in our pieces bags. It's vegetable tanned with olive oil pulp. It gives it this lovely white look. It will stamp and mould the same way that any other vegetable tan leather will, and it's just got a lovely texture to it, but it will also show up well on the camera. I'm going to use a red thread for the same reason, so hopefully it'll be easier for you to follow what I'm doing. So I start with putting a knot in the end, and I will show you how to flatten the knots at the end of the tutorial. I've already pre-chiselled my holes and grooved, and I tend to use a double-sided thin tape that we sell to tape my leathers together, which just stops them moving around, particularly when I'm doing wallets and things like that. It just gives me my nice neat edge. I've then chiselled my holes through in the same direction. So I'm going to start to come up from the hole just one away, and that'll be where my knot's left. And then I'm going to bring my thread, instead of through the same hole, I'm going to bring it down through that hole there. So one down, and when you're putting this first one in, you just want to guide the thread so that you get it straight. You can kind of manipulate it with your fingers until you pull it tight and get it lined up straight. If this was an area, say for example at the top of a pocket where it's going to have a lot of stress, I might do a couple of rounds of that just to give it some extra strength. I'm going to go back on myself now, and that's why it's called backstitch. So down through that hole. And once you get a rhythm going of it, it's kind of a nice stitch, as you'll see. And then we come back up through the hole down. So from the back we're going down 2, forwards 2, back 1. And as you go, just as you're pulling them each tight, just pull them tight and make sure the leather's not puckered and smooth, and that way your stitches will end up nice and neat. I get a little bit further along and then I can show you the back. Now hopefully you'll get an idea of how much quicker it is to do this as a stitch. I'm just going to pull my tail. So I made my tail about 3/4 of the length of the thread so that I can just adjust it as I go along. And you want to have at least four lengths of whatever you're stitching. But don't make it massively long so that you end up getting in a big tangle. That's why pulling the tail down and then adjusting it as you go along can be a good move. Gives you a longer length of thread to work with, but without it getting in your way. So hopefully you can see it coming together here. And just making sure, like there, that you don't catch through the leather on the back. If I actually put it through the hole, yeah, so there, making sure that you're not pushing through the thread, but you're coming up to one side of it. This will help it to pull tight. If you've gone through the thread, it stops the lock going so tight. Okay, and we've got to the end. And we've finished our line. So if I turn it over now, this is what my back looks like. Okay. Now you can just neaten this off and stop there. But what I like to do is to go through where those stitches are overlapping there. If you go back on yourself and take your needle through and pull it tight, you can wrap your tail of your thread through, and this also has the advantage of pulling the stitches just that fraction tighter, so you get them looking neater on the front as well. So I'm going to work my way along, looking for the points where the stitches overlap, pulling my tail thread out as I need to. And the other thing you can do at this point, if you wanted to make a bit more of a feature of it on the back, is to change the thread for a different colour and make this wrap thread a contrasting colour, and that can give quite a nice little detail and effect. And sometimes I've even done that and used this as the top of my thread, using it in a decorative way. And if you do that, then you need to start with your knots on the other side. So you get the idea. We're just going through, wrapping that round, pulling that stitch together and neatening it. So if I just do those last two. And because this is tied round, I'm just going to snip my end there. Now you can see I've got my little knot that I started with, so I'm going to trim the little tail off the knot there. And then just to finally neaten everything, I'm going to press down either with a bone folder, or I like to use the rounded bit of my awl, and I'm going to rub that whole stitch down so that it lies nice and flat. The advantage of working with wax thread in Leathercraft is that you can get these smoothing effects. So that's completely flattened the stitches now across there, so they won't catch or wear, and on the front you've got a really neat stitch line, and that's how to do backstitch. I hope you found that useful. The threads and the tools mentioned you can find on www.identityleathercraft.com. Thank you very much for watching.